No one tells you when the war begins. There is no declaration, no trumpet, no visible enemy. It starts quietly, the moment you begin to live a life that isn't yours. The moment your thoughts are edited before they're spoken. The moment your instincts are corrected by applause, punishment, or reward. The moment survival becomes more important than truth. That is when the war against your soul begins. Not with violence, but with permission. Permission to compromise once, then again, then forever. You are taught early that peace comes from fitting in. That safety comes from agreement. That love is conditional on obedience. So you learn to negotiate with yourself. You trade curiosity for certainty, desire for approval, depth for efficiency. And slowly, something inside you stops speaking. The world does not need to attack your soul directly. It only needs to distract you long enough that you abandon it yourself. By the time you notice the exhaustion, the numbness, the quiet resentment, the strange grief you can't explain, the damage feels irreversible. You tell yourself this is adulthood. This is maturity. This is reality. But it isn't. It is occupation. Because the most violent war is not fought with weapons. It is fought with ideas, with expectations, with invisible rules that shape who you're allowed to become. And once the soul is conquered, the body follows willingly. This video is not about motivation. It is not about success. It is not about rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is about recognizing the battlefield. Because you cannot defend what you do not know is under attack. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, you're not alone. Subscribe, not for answers, but for clarity. And stay until the end, because what we'll uncover isn't how the war starts. It's why it's designed to feel normal. The war against your soul is subtle. It is quiet. It begins in the spaces no one notices, the invisible corridors of your mind. You are not assaulted by weapons or screams or enemies you can name. You are assaulted by expectations, obligations, distractions, and the slow drip of compromise. Every morning, the world hands you a tiny demand disguised as necessity. A polite request to adjust your thoughts, your behavior, your desires. You comply, and in compliance, a fragment of you dies. Consider this. In childhood, curiosity is your natural state. You ask questions, you feel deeply. You believe in the weight of your own intuition. But society, subtly and insistently, teaches you that curiosity must be moderated. Questions must be safe. Feelings must be acceptable. Dreams must be realistic. You learn quickly that your impulses, the raw, chaotic signals from your own soul, are inconvenient. They do not fit neatly into school, into social hierarchy, into the narrow lanes carved for acceptable life. So you begin to censor, first softly, then firmly. By the time you reach adulthood, this censorship is second nature. Your mind, once wide and elastic, has been shaped into a predictable instrument. The world does not need to hit you with force. It only needs to reward predictability, conformity, and emotional obedience. And you accept it because the cost of resistance, alienation, failure, ridicule feels unbearable. Each compromise seems minor. Each concession seems rational. Yet cumulatively, they erode the very essence of self. Erosion is not sudden. It is patient. It builds in layers. You start with small compromises in taste, in opinion, in the stories you tell yourself about who you are. You avoid conflicts, suppress your outrage, and learn to nod politely when your instincts scream otherwise. Gradually, the internal dialogue that once guided you begins to whisper, and fades, then disappears. You operate in the world as a shadow of your own potential, carrying a form without substance, obeying codes written by forces external to your being. Observe the mechanisms. They are everywhere. The media that dictates what is valuable, the institutions that dictate what is moral, the social circles that dictate what is admired. Each functions as a subtle instrument of conditioning. Their purpose is not overt domination, but the creation of dependency. The more you rely on approval, instruction, and permission, the less you rely on your own judgment. You begin to consult the world before yourself. And here lies the brilliance of this quiet war. The conqueror does not appear as an enemy. It appears as a mentor, a guide, a friend, a necessary authority. You hand over power willingly. The architecture of soul erosion is reinforced by repetition. Habits, routines, obligations, and social expectations are bricks and mortar. Each day, the unexamined choice to obey, rather than question, lays another layer. A small sacrifice of curiosity today, a dismissal of your emotional depth, a quiet betrayal of instinct seems inconsequential. But the mind remembers. The body remembers. The soul remembers even when you forget. And slowly, the structure rises. A vast edifice of compliance, predictability, and quiet submission. Consider your attention. It is a finite resource, the currency of the soul. And the world is designed to spend it. Each notification, each demand, each urgent message is a lever to redirect your energy. Each act of compliance, each concession costs psychic currency. You give, and the world rarely returns. You give, and the world barely notices. And in giving, in bending, in yielding, you begin to experience a strange, pervasive exhaustion. It is not physical fatigue, nor even emotional fatigue. It is soul fatigue. It is the sensation of being present, but absent, participating, but observing from a distance, alive but not fully inhabiting your own body. History provides countless examples. Think of the artist whose work is dictated by trends, the thinker whose thought is dictated by public opinion, the worker whose life is dictated by metrics of productivity rather than intuition. These individuals exist in the world, yet a part of them remains untouchable, a silent protest against the theft of self. But many are not aware of this theft until much later, often when they are confronted with the consequences. Unfulfilled potential, a hollow sense of identity, a life that feels prewritten by others. And here is a critical insight. The war against the soul is most effective when disguised as normalcy. Those who live under its influence rarely feel oppressed. They feel routine, they feel structure, they feel safety. Safety, after all, is the most seductive weapon of all. The moment we feel secure in our conformity, we cease to question. And yet, the price is existential. Freedom of thought, clarity of feeling, authenticity of action. The erosion continues quietly, beneath the surface of apparent stability. Now consider the social dimension. Approval is the currency of collective existence. To fit in, to be liked, to be valued, one must often sacrifice authenticity. We bend to the desires of family, friends, colleagues, and society at large. Each compromise seems small. Each betrayal seems justifiable. It is easier this way, we tell ourselves. It avoids conflict. It ensures harmony. It keeps me safe. But the cost is profound. The constant deferment of self. The postponement of the individual genius that resides in each mind. The quiet extinction of what is most uniquely yours. Erosion also manifests in time. The soul requires attention, reflection, and contemplation. Yet the modern world trades depth for breadth, process for outcome, and experience for convenience. We are asked to be efficient with time, to measure ourselves by output, to prioritize externally dictated goals over internal exploration. Hours once devoted to solitude, thought, and creative energy are now spent in busywork and distraction. The result is a mind capable of functioning, but rarely of flourishing. A life that is observed, but seldom fully inhabited. Awareness is the first line of defense. Recognizing the architecture of erosion allows you to see the battlefield clearly. The subtle manipulations, the repeated concessions, the tiny betrayals that accumulate, once visible, they can be resisted. Resistance does not require grand gestures or dramatic rebellion. It begins in quiet moments of choice, refusing to defer to convention when it violates your sense of truth, guarding your attention when others demand it unthinkingly, listening to instinct when it whispers the inconvenient truth. But resistance is difficult. The war has been waged silently for decades before we are aware. Every act of self-trust is met with internal doubt. Every exercise of independence is met with social friction. The structure of erosion is supported by millions of reinforcing voices, the voices of authority, of culture, of habit, and of fear itself. These are not trivial challenges. They are the mortar and steel of a system designed to wear you down over a lifetime. Yet there is hope. Even the most carefully constructed edifice can be undermined if you understand its foundations. Awareness transforms inertia into agency. Reflection transforms habit into intention. Courage transforms fear into action. And when the mind begins to reclaim its autonomy, the world's invisible architecture of control starts to tremble. The first acts are small. Saying no when a reflexive yes would suffice. Choosing stillness when others demand reaction. Listening inward when the crowd shouts. But these small choices compound. They are the beginning of a reclamation. The soul, once ignored, once sacrificed, begins to reassert itself. Curiosity returns. Instincts awaken. Attention sharpens. Energy, once dispersed, begins to concentrate. And slowly, the invisible war turns. The battlefield is not won with swords, but with clarity, focus, and courage. You begin to see that life has always been giving you signals, moments of discomfort, confusion, or emptiness, not as punishment, but as guidance. They are signposts pointing to the compromises you have made, the layers of erosion that can now be peeled away. And so, Chapter 1 closes with a recognition. The war against your soul is real, relentless, and invisible. Its victory is subtle, measured not in blood, but in years of lost authenticity. But equally real is the capacity to resist, to reclaim, and to rebuild. Awareness is your first weapon. Intention is your second. And action, even small and deliberate, is the beginning of liberation. The world does not attack your soul directly. That would be inefficient. Instead, it trains you, slowly, methodically. From the moment you become aware of others, you are taught a single dangerous lesson. Belonging is safer than truth. This lesson becomes the spine of your behavior, long before you can articulate it. You learn that approval brings comfort, while authenticity brings risk. And so, the war advances not through violence, but through education. Every system you pass through reinforces this message. School rewards memorization over insight, obedience over curiosity, correct answers over honest questions. You are praised not for seeing deeply, but for fitting correctly. Each gold star, each grade, each moment of validation conditions you to associate worth with compliance. Over time, you stop asking what feels right and start asking what will be accepted. This is not accidental. A society cannot function smoothly if too many people think independently. As you grow older, the conditioning becomes more refined. Social groups replace classrooms. Trends replace textbooks. Popular opinion replaces teachers. The rules remain the same. Align, adapt, and never deviate too far. You learn to read rooms instead of reading yourself. You sense when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to hide discomfort behind politeness. These skills are praised as emotional intelligence, but beneath them lies something more corrosive, self-erasure. You begin to betray yourself in subtle ways. You laugh at jokes that disturb you. You nod at ideas that feel hollow. You suppress impulses that do not match the dominant tone of the room. Each act seems harmless. After all, Everyone does it. Yet each one leaves a residue. A quiet resentment. A dull ache. A sense that you are performing rather than living. The world calls this maturity. In truth, it is training. The most effective weapon in this war is fear. Not fear of death, but fear of isolation. Humans are social creatures, and the threat of exclusion cuts deep. The world understands this instinct well. It teaches you, explicitly and implicitly, that deviation has consequences. Speak the wrong truth, and you may be labeled difficult. Question the wrong belief, and you may be labeled dangerous. Refuse to participate in the performance, and you may be labeled irrelevant. These labels work because they exploit a primal anxiety. To be unseen is to be unsafe. And so, you begin to self-police. You do not need an external authority watching you anymore. You anticipate judgment before it arrives. You edit your thoughts before they are spoken. You shrink your inner world to avoid friction with the outer one. This is a critical turning point in the war. The moment you become your own censor, the system no longer needs to enforce control. You enforce it for them. Over time, this self-betrayal becomes habitual. You stop noticing it. The inner voice that once protested grows quieter, not because it agrees, but because it has learned it will not be heard. This silence is often mistaken for peace. But peace is alive. This silence is inert. It is the stillness of something restrained, not something resolved. The marketplace intensifies this conditioning. Your worth is increasingly measured by visibility, productivity, and performance. You are encouraged to brand yourself, optimize yourself, sell yourself. Identity becomes a product. The more predictable you are, the easier you are to categorize, market, and consume. Complexity is inconvenient. Depth is inefficient. Ambiguity is unprofitable. And so, the world nudges you toward simplification, not for your sake, but for its own. In this environment, inner conflict is treated as a flaw rather than a signal. Doubt is framed as weakness. Stillness is framed as laziness. Reflection is framed as stagnation. You are encouraged to move constantly, react instantly, and decide quickly. There is no time to sit with discomfort, no space to listen to intuition. And without time and space, the soul starves. Relationships, too, become arenas of quiet compromise. You shape yourself to be palatable. You soften truths to preserve harmony. You trade honesty for connection. Again, each choice feels reasonable. But slowly, you begin to wonder why connection feels draining rather than nourishing. Why being with others leaves you emptier than being alone. This is not because intimacy is flawed, but because intimacy without authenticity is a transaction, not a bond. The world rewards this self-betrayal generously. You receive praise, stability, and a sense of belonging. You are told you are doing well. You may even believe it, but beneath the surface, something restless stirs. A persistent sense that you are living adjacent to your life, rather than inside it. That you are following a script you did not write. That the person you present to the world is slowly diverging from the person you feel yourself to be. This divergence creates psychological tension. The mind works tirelessly to justify the betrayal. It tells stories. This is just how life is. Everyone compromises. Authenticity is a luxury. These stories soothe the discomfort temporarily, but they deepen the fracture. The more you rationalize self-abandonment, the harder it becomes to return. And yet, cracks begin to appear. Moments of exhaustion that rest cannot fix. Success that feels strangely empty. Praise that lands without impact. These are not failures. They are signals. The soul does not speak in words. It speaks in sensations, in dissatisfaction, in longing, in the quiet grief of unrealized self. The world will encourage you to silence these signals, to distract yourself, to medicate them with entertainment, ambition, or noise. But if you listen closely, you may recognize them for what they are: messages from a part of you that has not surrendered. A reminder that something essential has been neglected. Understanding this is dangerous in the best possible way. Because once you see how the world teaches you to betray yourself, you can no longer unsee it. You begin to notice the moments of choice, the pause before agreement, the hesitation before silence, the instinct you are about to override. And in that pause lies power. Betrayal was never forced, it was learned. And anything learned can be unlearned. The war advances only as long as it remains invisible. The moment you recognize the pattern, the training begins to fail. You may still comply at times. You may still compromise. But awareness changes the texture of those choices. They are no longer automatic. They are conscious. And consciousness is the enemy of control. This chapter ends with a quiet truth. The world did not steal your soul. It taught you how to give it away. And if you learned how to give it, you can learn how to reclaim it. Living against your nature does not break you all at once. It fractures you slowly, quietly, in ways that are difficult to trace back to their source. At first, the cost feels abstract. A mild restlessness, a subtle fatigue, a sense of disconnection that comes and goes. You tell yourself it is normal. Everyone feels this way. But the longer you remain divided from yourself, the more concrete the damage becomes. The mind is designed to integrate experience, emotion, and action into a coherent whole. When what you feel, think, and do are aligned, energy flows efficiently. But when you consistently act in ways that contradict your inner signals, the system strains. Psychological tension builds. This tension does not disappear simply because you ignore it. It converts. It manifests as anxiety, irritability, numbness, or depression. These are not random malfunctions. They are the body's way of expressing an unresolved internal conflict. One of the earliest costs is emotional dulling. When you repeatedly suppress authentic responses, the psyche adapts by lowering sensitivity. This adaptation is protective at first. It shields you from the pain of constant self-denial. But over time, it dulls joy alongside discomfort. You stop feeling deeply, not because life has become shallow, but because depth has become dangerous. Feeling too much might expose truths you have learned to avoid. This dulling often masquerades as maturity. You become calm, composed, reasonable. Others may admire your stability, but inside, something vital has gone quiet. Passion fades, curiosity weakens. You begin to experience life as something to manage rather than something to inhabit. The days blend together. Time accelerates. Years pass with little memory attached to them. This is not because nothing happened, but because nothing touched you fully. Another cost is chronic self-doubt. When you habitually override your instincts, you weaken trust in your own perceptions. You begin to look outward for validation, direction, and permission. Decisions feel heavier. Choices provoke anxiety. You second-guess yourself even in small matters. The inner compass, once reliable, now spins uncertainly. You may interpret this as a lack of confidence, but it is more accurate to call it a lack of self-relationship. This erosion of self-trust makes you increasingly dependent on external structures. Rules, routines, and authorities become substitutes for intuition. While structure can be useful, reliance becomes a problem when it replaces inner guidance entirely. You follow paths because they are established, not because they are meaningful. You pursue goals because they are admired, not because they resonate. And when these paths fail to satisfy, you blame yourself rather than the misalignment. Living against your nature also distorts relationships. When you are disconnected from yourself, you struggle to connect authentically with others. You present curated versions of who you are. You avoid vulnerability not because you lack courage, but because you lack clarity about what you would reveal. Intimacy requires presence, and presence requires honesty. Without it, relationships become shallow, performative, or exhausting. Over time, resentment begins to accumulate, not always toward specific people, but toward life itself. You may feel that something has been taken from you, though you cannot name what. This resentment often turns inward. You criticize yourself for feeling ungrateful. You shame yourself for dissatisfaction. But the resentment is not a character flaw. It is the psyche's protest against prolonged self-neglect. The body, too, bears the cost. Chronic stress emerges when inner conflict becomes a constant state. Sleep is disrupted. The nervous system remains on edge. You may experience unexplained tension, headaches, or fatigue. Modern culture often treats these symptoms in isolation, but they are frequently interconnected expressions of a deeper issue, living in contradiction to oneself. Perhaps the most profound cost is the loss of meaning. Meaning arises when actions align with values and experience aligns with identity. When alignment is absent, even success feels hollow. Achievements fail to satisfy. Milestones feel strangely irrelevant. You may reach goals you once desired and feel nothing. This emptiness is often misinterpreted as ambition for more, but it is actually a signal that the pursuit itself is misdirected. At this stage, many people double down. They push harder. They seek more stimulation, more status, more distraction. But intensity cannot replace authenticity. In fact, it often deepens the problem. The louder the external noise, the harder it becomes to hear the quiet voice within. And yet, that voice does not disappear. It waits. Moments of crisis often bring it back into focus. Burnout, loss, failure, sudden change. These experiences strip away familiar structures and force confrontation with what remains. For some, this is terrifying. For others, it is a strange relief. When the external world collapses, the inner world becomes unavoidable. The war against the soul becomes visible. This visibility is painful, but it is also an opportunity. Pain is not the enemy here. Numbness is. Pain indicates contact. It means something still cares. The discomfort of realizing you have been living against your nature is the beginning of reorientation. It signals that the self you abandoned has not vanished. It has been waiting. Reconnecting with your nature does not require dramatic rebellion. It begins with attention, with noticing when something feels wrong, even if you cannot explain why, with allowing discomfort to exist without immediately silencing it, with asking quiet questions instead of forcing quick answers. This process is slow. It is often lonely, but it is real. The psychological cost of self-betrayal is high, but it is not irreversible. The psyche is remarkably adaptive. It can heal when alignment is restored. Energy returns. Sensitivity sharpens. Meaning re-emerges. Not because life becomes easier, but because it becomes honest. This chapter closes with a difficult truth and a hopeful one. The truth is that living against your nature will always demand payment. The hopeful truth is that the bill arrives as a signal, not a sentence. And signals, when listened to, can guide you home. Every long war ends the same way. Not with a final explosion, not with total victory, but with exhaustion. The war against the soul is no different. One day, the mind grows tired of suppressing what it knows. The body grows tired of carrying tension that does not belong to it. The spirit grows tired of negotiating for permission to exist. This moment does not arrive with drama. It arrives quietly, almost humbly, as a realization. Continuing this way costs more than changing. The end of the war does not mean the world suddenly becomes gentle. It means you stop turning its violence inward. For years, perhaps decades, you learn to override yourself. You learn to doubt first instincts, silence inconvenient emotions, and reshape desires until they fit something acceptable. You became skilled at survival. But survival is not the same as living. and eventually the soul demands a different arrangement. Reclaiming the self does not begin with bold declarations. It begins with small acts of refusal. Refusing to laugh when something feels wrong. Refusing to agree when something feels hollow. Refusing to move faster than your nervous system can tolerate. These refusals may seem insignificant, but they are not. They are the first ceasefire agreements you sign with yourself. At first, this feels dangerous. When you stop complying automatically, fear rushes in. Fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of being misunderstood. These fears are real because the old strategy did protect you from certain consequences. But protection came at a cost. Now you are choosing a different risk, the risk of being real. That risk feels sharper because it is unfamiliar, not because it is wrong. As you reclaim your inner authority, confusion often appears before clarity. Years of outsourcing decisions leave the inner voice underdeveloped. When you finally ask yourself what you want, the answer may be silence. This silence is not emptiness. It is recovery. Like a limb relearning movement, the self needs time to remember its strength. Patience here is not optional. It is essential. You will notice subtle changes before obvious ones. A sense of relief when you tell the truth, even quietly. A reduction in inner friction. A feeling of standing more firmly in your body. These are not signs of ego or rebellion. They are signs of alignment. The psyche recognizes when it is no longer at war with itself, and it responds by releasing energy previously used for defense. The world may not celebrate this change. In fact, resistance is likely. People who benefited from your compliance may feel unsettled. Systems that relied on your predictability may push back. This is not proof you are doing something wrong. It is proof that you are no longer easy to control. Authenticity disrupts environments built on unspoken agreements of silence. One of the deepest myths is that reclaiming yourself requires abandoning responsibility. In truth, it demands more responsibility, not less. When you stop blaming expectations, traditions, or pressures, you stand alone with your choices. There is no longer a script to hide behind. This can feel heavy, but it is also freeing. Ownership brings weight, and weight brings gravity. People feel gravity even when you say nothing. As the war ends, your relationship with discomfort changes. You no longer treat it as a signal to retreat, but as information. Anxiety becomes a message instead of a verdict. Sadness becomes a teacher instead of a flaw. Even anger, once suppressed, becomes a boundary rather than a weapon. Emotional honesty does not make life painless. It makes pain meaningful. You may grieve what was lost during the war, the years spent performing, the paths taken out of fear, the parts of yourself that went quiet for too long. This grief is necessary. It is the mourning of a life unlived. But grief also marks transition. You cannot reclaim yourself without acknowledging what was sacrificed. Avoiding this grief only prolongs the conflict. Gradually, something shifts. Decisions become simpler, even when they are difficult. You stop asking what will look best and start asking what feels true. This does not guarantee success, approval, or comfort. It guarantees coherence, and coherence is powerful. A coherent person does not need to convince. Their presence carries clarity. The war against the soul thrives on fragmentation. It weakens you by dividing thought from feeling, action from value, identity from experience. Ending the war restores wholeness. You become less dramatic, not more, less reactive, less desperate. There is a calm that emerges when you no longer need to argue with yourself. This calm is often misunderstood as detachment. It is not. It is engagement without self-betrayal. You still care. You still feel. But you are no longer leaking energy into internal battles that cannot be won. That energy returns to you, usable, directed, alive. The final stage of the war's end is acceptance. Acceptance that you cannot undo the past, but you can stop repeating it. Acceptance that living truthfully will cost you certain illusions. Acceptance that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the absence of internal betrayal. When you accept this, the war loses its fuel. You do not emerge as a perfected version of yourself. You emerge as an honest one. Honest enough to listen. Honest enough to change. Honest enough to stand still when the world demands motion. This honesty is not loud. It does not announce itself. But it is felt. The long and violent war against your soul ends the moment you stop fighting yourself on behalf of a world that never had to live inside you. And when it ends, what remains is not weakness, not emptiness, but something far more dangerous to systems built on control. It leaves you whole. If this felt uncomfortably accurate, don't rush to explain it away. Let it sit. The kind of clarity that changes a life rarely arrives loudly. It arrives as recognition. If you're ready to stop fighting yourself, to think more deeply, and to reclaim the parts of you that were never meant to be surrendered, stay here. Subscribe not for motivation, but for alignment. These videos aren't meant to entertain you. They're meant to sharpen you. And if one sentence stayed with you, write it down. That's where the work begins.